The rain tapped lightly against the window pane as Lily sat cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, a beam of pale light illuminating motes of dust swirling around her. She had always been a curious child, with wide green eyes that missed nothing, and a gentle smile that could soften even her father's stern demeanor. The family had moved into the old house only a week ago, a creaking Victorian manor that whispered secrets with every groan of its floorboards. As she rummaged through chests of moth-eaten blankets and tarnished trinkets, something at the bottom of an old wooden box caught her eye, a porcelain doll with glassy blue eyes and a faded lace dress. Cradling it gently, Lily felt an unexpected chill, but dismissed it as a draft from the attic's small window. She decided to name the doll Abigail, unaware of the shadows that stirred with her discovery. Downstairs, Sarah stood by the kitchen sink, lost in thought as she watched the gray clouds drift across the sky. She was weary from the move, her usually bright demeanor dampened by exhaustion. Mark shuffled through paperwork at the dining table, his glasses perched precariously on his nose. He was practical to a fault, often burying himself in work to avoid confronting the tension that had been growing between him and Sarah. They both hoped the new home would be a fresh start, a place to mend their frayed relationship. When Lily burst into the room with Abigail in tow, Sarah forced a smile. "What have you got there, sweetheart?" she asked, kneeling to get a closer look. "I found her in the attic," Lily beamed. Mark glanced over, his brow furrowing. "Looks old. Be careful with that, it might be fragile." But as Lily hugged the doll tightly, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something about its fixed stare was unnerving. That night, the house settled into an uneasy silence. Moonlight cast long shadows through the halls, and the wind whispered unintelligible words. Lily slept soundly, Abigail tucked beside her. Around midnight, the floorboards outside her room creaked softly. In the master bedroom, Sarah stirred, her dreams plagued by distant echoes and fleeting silhouettes. She awoke to a faint giggle, so delicate she wondered if she'd imagined it. Mark slept beside her, undisturbed. Determined to quell her anxiety, she ventured into the hallway. The air was colder than before, and as she passed Lily's room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, she saw Lily asleep, but the doll was no longer beside her. A sudden dread washed over Sarah as she sensed movement down the corridor. Following the shadows, she found Abigail propped up at the end of the hallway, seated upright in an old rocking chair that had been left by the previous owners. Her heart pounded as she retrieved the doll and returned it to Lily's room, convincing herself it was all just a coincidence. The following days grew increasingly strange. Objects seemed to shift when no one was looking. Picture frames hung crooked, keys went missing, and mirrors fogged without reason. Mark dismissed it all as post-move chaos, but Sarah felt an undercurrent of something she couldn't explain. One afternoon, she decided to dispose of the doll, gently taking it from Lily under the guise of giving it a bath. As she stepped into the backyard to toss it into the garbage bin, a sharp pain shot through her temples. The world around her blurred, and for a moment she was engulfed in a vision, a desolate landscape of twisted trees and shadows that stretched toward her like grasping hands. Frozen in terror, she heard whispers seeping into her mind, an incomprehensible chant that grew louder until it was a scream. Gasping, she found herself back in the yard, the doll still clutched in her trembling hands. Abandoning her plan, she rushed back inside, her breath shallow. Mark noticed her pallor. "Are you okay?" he asked with a rare hint of concern. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just stressed, I think." That night, both parents were pulled into fitful sleep. Mark dreamt he was trapped in a labyrinth of mirrors, his reflection distorted and laughing at him. Sarah found herself wandering through the old house, each room leading back to the same place, the attic, where Abigail waited with a sinister smile. They awoke simultaneously in a cold sweat. Determined to end the madness, Mark decided they should all dispose of the doll together, hoping it would ease their minds and perhaps help Lily let go. They drove to a remote area by the river, and together they watched as Mark hurled Abigail into the rushing water. Lily cried softly, but Sarah assured her it was for the best. Relief washed over them as they returned home, a sense of normalcy beginning to settle. But as dusk fell, the oppressive atmosphere returned tenfold. The house groaned, and the temperature plummeted. In the dim light of the hallway, Lily stood staring at something. "She's back," she whispered. At their feet lay the soaked and muddy doll, her glassy eyes reflecting their horrified faces. Panic set in as the family realized they were ensnared in something beyond their understanding. Every attempt to rid themselves of Abigail resulted in increasingly violent visions. Mark began losing time, finding himself in rooms with no memory of how he got there. Sarah heard whispers in the walls, calling her name in voices that sounded both familiar and alien. Lily became withdrawn, often humming lullabies they had never taught her. The doll seemed to be everywhere at once, its presence suffocating. Desperate, they sought help from priests and psychics, but none could penetrate the darkness enveloping their lives. One night, as a storm raged outside, they gathered in the living room, the air thick with unspoken fear. "We have to leave," Sarah pleaded. Mark nodded, defeat etched on his face. But as they tried to step outside, an invisible force held them back, the doors refusing to open, the windows unbreakable. In their final moments of despair, a realization dawned upon them. The doll wasn't just manipulating objects, it was orchestrating their fates. Their lives had become threads in a tapestry woven by an unseen hand, each decision influenced, each fear amplified. Lily approached them, her eyes reflecting an unsettling calm. "She says you can't leave," she whispered. "She wants us to stay forever." The room began to spin, the walls bending and stretching. Sarah and Mark clutched each other as reality fragmented around them. The house groaned, and with a deafening crack, everything went black. When the morning sun bathed the manor, it appeared serene and untouched. Neighbors noticed the family's car still in the driveway, but no signs of life within. Weeks passed, and eventually new tenants moved in, charmed by the quaint beauty of the old house. In the attic, a little girl named Emily discovered a porcelain doll with glassy blue eyes and a faded lace dress. "Look what I found," she called out. As she held the doll, a cold breeze swept through the attic, and somewhere deep within the shadows, faint whispers began to stir once more.